Greetings, Terrarians, Khaios here. Welcome back to my build tip series. It's been quite a while since I've had one of these. In fact, since 1.4 came out and I created this new build tip world, I've only had the one episode where I show you the tools of the trade for building in 1.4. And a lot of you have been asking for me to revisit this series and get some more beginner tips out, especially beginner tips. And that's precisely what I'm going to be doing today. As you can see in the title of this video and the thumbnail, we're going to be turning this into this. So here we have a standard shoebox or wooden box house that most players build. Usually they'll do something like place a hole in the side with some platforms and then build more of the same house right on top. And these are functional, obviously. They're valid NPC houses. You don't even need anything more than this. But a lot of players want to build something that looks nice, that also functions well. And today, I'm going to show you how you can turn these houses into something that looks much nicer without too much effort, just with a few tips and tricks. But before I do that, I just want to mention that this channel is well on its way to 200,000 subscribers. So if you enjoy these kinds of build tips, I would really appreciate it you letting me know that I'm doing a good job, by letting YouTube know that I'm doing a good job, by leaving a like and a comment, or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And that would really help us reach that 200,000 subscriber milestone. I'd greatly appreciate it. So my first tip for improving these kinds of builds is to actually adjust the room size. Right now it's pretty claustrophobic in here. I don't see this often, but sometimes I even see people with roofs all the way down to here. Now it could just be an efficiency thing. This could be how players, want to build their houses. Now obviously, if you're watching this video right now, that's not what you want. You want to make a nicer looking house, otherwise why else would you be here? So in order to make a better house, my first tip is to create a larger space. I like to increase the roof size. This is the standard roof that we see in box houses. For smaller houses, I actually take that one block higher. So if I grab my ruler over here, you can see that this is actually 5 tiles high in gap. This is perfect for a smaller house. If I was going to be making a larger house, I would actually go 1 block higher than that. Now, this looks a little strange in a house that's this narrow, right? Because it almost looks like a square. It's still a rectangle, but it's getting a lot closer to that square territory. And that's where the other part of this increase your room size comes in. If you make this a bit wider, all of a sudden that vaulted ceiling height makes a lot more sense. And this spacious area, it might not be the most efficient, but obviously we're not looking for efficiency, we're looking for good looking NPC houses, so we can increase the size of our NPC houses. The next most important thing to me is creating a foundation. Now, you've seen me talk about this a lot if you're not new to the channel or if you've seen the channel often. And there's a few different ways that we could do this. You could either just place blocks into the ground and it looks good. Like it adds texture beneath the house. It looks like it's actually buried into the ground like this. And in my opinion, adding just a simple foundation like this adds a whole lot of detail and structure to this building, rather than just having it sit on top of dirt, just flat like this. It's boring, it's just not very interesting to look at. But even more than just placing blocks under there, what I personally like to do is create something that I refer to as a false foundation. If you've watched my channel, you've seen me do this probably hundreds of times by now. It's something that I came up with before 1.4 came out, because I knew that some of the block blending was not going to be working the way that it used to, and I thought, well, how can I deal with that block blending and still have foundations that I like to place? And my solution was to just create a fake foundation. Now obviously you don't want to see the foundation in real life, but this isn't real life, this is Terraria. Having a gap under here and being able to place background walls just adds a nice layer of detail to the building. It's not necessary, and obviously it's not very realistic either, but it does look great, and that's what we're after here. The next tip is going to have us looking at the exterior of the house. And we're going to start off by increasing the floor by 1 block on either side. And the reason for this is because I don't want an overhang, because what we're going to be doing next is actually increasing the thickness of the house. Now right now, when houses are built by players who are kind of inexperienced with building, I most often see very thin houses like this, where it's 1 block walls, 1 block ceiling. And that just looks flimsy to me. It looks like it could be blown over easily. So adding some simple thickness to that, just on the sides and on the ceiling, just adds a lot more stability to it. And I like to have my walls not overhang my floors. I would rather have the floor come out from under the wall than to have the floor be behind the wall, if that makes any sense to you. So personally, I bring the floors out, I bring the walls out and the ceiling. I don't feel like it's necessary to do this for the foundation, because the false foundation that we laid beneath the building adds that on its own. Even if you did an inlaid foundation with blocks, it also adds to that, and I don't think it's necessary on the floor. Another very important part of building a house is orientation, planning things out. So here we have a single house. If you want a single house, fantastic, but usually people tend to pair their NPCs up. I don't recommend doing more than 2 or 3 in an area, because every NPC that you add after 2 decreases their happiness, as long as they're within 25 tiles. So I recommend planning your houses out. You could do single houses if you want. I tend to do townhouses with 2 or 3 rooms, or you could even do something like having a bunch of vanity rooms that go unused because you want to make the build look good. But nonetheless, however you plan it, start deciding how you want to orient the entire house. Like, maybe I want to bring this floor out over here, and maybe I want to increase the roof over here and create a structure like this. Now, don't be afraid to vary the height of your rooms. You can see here that this room is not as tall as the bottom floor. It's only 5 tall. And this is going to be 6 tall. It's totally okay to have different heights for your ceilings, your roofs. And it's, in fact, in my opinion, better to vary that than to not vary it. So I've altered the structure just a little bit on this side here because I wasn't quite happy with how it looked, and you should do the same. If you're not happy with how something's looking, change it until you are happy with it. But now that that's done, the next tip that I'm going to have is making things semi-realistic. Now, I've talked about realism in building a few times now. Obviously, it's not realistic for blocks to just float in the air, but they do in Terraria. That's the way it works. So everything that I'm going to be talking about right now is optional. Now, I think there's a balance between having too much realism and too little. And in my personal opinion, having something like this just overhanging, you don't need anything holding it up. It looks good as it is, but I think it looks a little bit better if you just tie this just a little bit into the real world by adding some supports underneath the structure. So I prefer adding stuff like this underneath overhangs, and even on the inside you could add visual supports to the building. Now, it doesn't always work depending on what kind of style you go with, but if you're doing like something medieval, you could possibly add some living wood using the living wood wand in the corners of the rooms and then hammer them, and it looks like just a little bit of support holding up the roof or the floor above. This has an added benefit of changing the way that the room looks. It's no longer as boxy or square. It diagonals these corners, just changing the overall appearance of the room. And if we did that with all of these rooms, even just a little bit over here or a larger section up here, then all of a sudden we wouldn't have a square look in every single room, which already adds a lot of variety to the house. And speaking of variety, that brings me to what I think might be the most important part to building, and that's adding variety. So as you can see here, we have a lot of wood, wooden beams, wooden furniture, wooden doors, wooden walls, wooden blocks. That's boring, it's bland, it's all the exact same. And that's a trap that I see a lot of new builders fall into. And not just wood, they'll pick one material and work with that material almost exclusively for a build. And while it can look good, I think it's much better to throw some variety in there. So what I recommend doing, and what I try to do, is have a different block for your floor, a different block for your ceiling, different blocks for your walls, and different blocks for your roofs. We don't have any roofs on this build just yet, but we'll be getting to that in a little bit. But for instance, if I were to say grab some stone accent slab and make this my ceiling, all of a sudden that adds a lot of a different texture to this entire build, just drastically changing it with a small tiny row of stone accent slab. It's very, very easy to do. We could add even more variety by grabbing some gray brick and changing out all of the side walls with this gray brick as well. So we have that contrast between the two, and I think contrasts are pretty important when adding variety to a build. You could add contrast in multiple ways. It's not just by adding a different material, you could add a different texture. So while this is all stone, what we could do is add some segments that have a different texture of stone, like mudstone, with maybe some gray paint. So if we grab some gray paint and we grab our mudstone and we throw that up here, it's the same kind of material in a way as the gray bricks on the side. It's just a different texture. We have a stone looking roof up here now with a different texture, and we could vary that even further by doing stone on the very top and maybe along the sides here. I don't think that this would be a roof, and I'll talk about roofs in a little bit, but we could also grab brown paint and maybe some dynasty wood and throw this along this segment to vary it as well. Or we could just change up the wood floors entirely by adding some dynasty down here. There's literally unlimited, well, I guess it depends on how technical you want to get with the word unlimited, but the sky is the limit. Your imagination is the only limitation to a big extent. If you can imagine something, it's very likely that you can end up building it. It takes a lot of experience, a lot of know-how. You have to experiment around with materials a lot to know what works with other materials, what looks good, what doesn't. And that's not something you could just give a quick tip to and have an answer right away. It's not something I could just throw into a build tip video super easily. It's something that takes a lot of trial and error, and it's kind of a journey for everybody to undertake on their own. But the variety doesn't just stop at adding the blocks. It also goes into the walls. It's very, very good to add wall variety. And I do this in two different ways for walls. For the walls primary material, so what I want this building to be mostly made out of, and then I have accents, which will just add variety to the wall. And the primary material of the room could be different for each room. So I could have a wooden room here and have a stone room over here. So I could just take all of this mudstone and fill in this area and just have a different texture, a different material. But the primary for each of these rooms will be one material, and then we'll fill in some accents. So if I make the primary in here mudstone that's been painted gray, and this is why paint is so powerful, you could just change the way something looks to match other objects in Terraria. But so now we have that looks like a stone room. This will be a stone room as well, and then we have those two wooden rooms. We could add accent to these in different ways to add quite a bit of texture. So if we grab like brown paint and large bamboo wall and we throw these in the background, all of a sudden we have a wooden support beam running through the stone, which just makes it stand out immensely. We could just run this all of the way down the center like that, and this could even be used for a pole that a spiral staircase wraps around or something like that. You could add wooden supports to wooden rooms even. That also looks good. It doesn't pop out as much as it does in a stone room, so it's good to have accents that pop out and accents that don't. If you wanted an accent that really pops out in this wooden room, what you could do is line the bottom of the floor with gray brick. And that instantly makes this room stand out. If we do the same thing up here, instantly that room stands out as well. Other things that you could do are add windows, and there's different ways you could do that. You could just add a glass window into the room, or you could add fences, which also let light in, and you could also see through them, but they might fit different themes differently. It all really boils down to what kind of theme you have for your build, what idea you have going in mind. That also pertains to furniture and even roof. The kind of roof that I would build on top of this would vary drastically depending on what kind of style I want to do this build in. Obviously, we started with a basic wooden house with just boxes layered on top of each other, and I'm going to copy that design twice, and I'm going to show you two different styles that you could easily turn these builds into and make them into really good looking houses. Now, normally I would recommend that you know what style you want the build to be in before you ever get started, but since this video is all about upgrading wooden boxes, I'm doing this a little bit backwards by showing you two wooden boxes, expanding on them, and now I'm going to be picking what styles I have. So I have two of them copied over, one here, one over there. This one, I'm going to be making a modern style, and we'll get to that second, but I'm going to be starting on this one here, and it's going to be medieval. If it's going to be sci-fi, if it's going to be fantasy, Victorian, whatever you could think of, it's really going to depend on what style you choose when you go to picking materials. So if we're looking at a medieval build here, I'm going to start off by doing the same thing that we did in the previous example, and that's going to be by placing some stone accent slab here. Now what I think I'm going to do for this building is show a couple of different examples of what you could do in a medieval build. I've covered tips like this in the past with my medieval build tip videos, so you can check those out if you want a little bit more detail in that. But I just want to go over quickly how you could adjust your wooden boxes to make them look like fancier houses pretty simply. Now, picking materials can be a pretty complicated task, especially if you're new to Terraria and you haven't had a whole lot of experience with materials. So a lot of this will be trial and error. You're going to have to figure out what works well together, what doesn't, and I would highly recommend checking out other builders' works, learning techniques from them. I don't mean plagiarizing or copying their builds. I don't think that helps anybody. But you can learn by seeing what other builders do in terms of techniques and emulating those techniques. So for this roof over here, I'm going to be making this entire tower stone. And on top of that, I'm going to give it a battlement roof. So just by having a layer of stone accent slab, and then some sandstone brick painted gray with some more stone accent slab, all of a sudden we have a medieval roof. Obviously the walls are wooden, it doesn't make much sense for a tower, so we could just replace those with crimstone brick that's been painted gray, and that's a fantastic looking medieval block. There are a lot of other options you can do instead of this too, but again, that's trial and error. It's not something I can easily show you in a short 20-minute video, if this is even going to be 20 minutes long. I'm not going to go too much into advanced tips. I can show you a bunch of advanced tips for something like this, and I might do that in another video, but we're just going to quickly replace all of these walls with the crimstone brick because I'm totally okay with that being the exterior walls for this entire building because we don't see a whole lot of walls to begin with. So with one roof out of the way, we need to work on the other roof, and that'll be right here. I'm going to actually start by carving a layer off of this, because I don't want the ceiling to be 2 blocks thick. I want the ceiling to be one material and the roof to be another. In this case, I'm actually going to grab the leaf wand and we're going to build kind of a thatched roof. And this, I don't want it to be perfectly flat at all. I could just kind of make it wavy up and down a little bit. This could be a fairly rough roof. and we're just going to taper it off at the end here, and then we're just going to thicken this up a little bit. So the reason why I'm okay with having a thinner ceiling is because this roof is actually going to be quite thick. I highly recommend using a hammer for the building process, especially for a roof like this. If you get rid of all of the blocky edges and you kind of either flatten them or round them out, it makes it look much better, in my opinion, than had you done nothing at all. And I'm just going to place one more block right there and then round that. And another thing you could do down here is round the inside as well. It's a little bit of a more finer detail, but it does add a lot of texture to the inside of this roof. You could even add a few more blocks here and there if you don't like all of the hay gaps that you've got going on. But once that's done, you end up with a nice looking medieval roof, and we have two medieval roof designs, in fact, on this single house. Next, before turning my attention to the interior walls, I'm going to look at this exterior support. So I wouldn't normally imagine that there would be an overhang like this in a medieval build, but it doesn't have to be support columns. There could actually be the appearance of a building behind it. So if you just grab some paint and the kind of brick walls that you're going to be throwing throughout the build, and you just throw those in the background, all of a sudden it makes it look like this building has a layer to it, a room to it that you can't access, which is great. You might think it's weird that there's a room that you can't gain access to, and that might be a little strange, but I think visually it makes sense to have a background wall right here, as if there's a room back here that we can't necessarily see in the build itself. It gives it more of a 3D feel without making it an isometric build. Now on the inside, I'm going to line the inside of these medieval doors with both shadewood fence and rich mahogany fence, and I think that is just a really good looking wooden pole in a lot of uses, but the main reason I put that outside of my doors is so it doesn't shoot out the side. You see, if I grab any other material that's not a fence and I place it there, it comes out of the side. You might like that personally, but go with what you like. So up next, I'm going to be making this entire tower stone. This room will be stone as well, but the other two will be wooden. And just like that, very, very simply, using some walls and paints, we add a lot of variety to these rooms. We've got stone rooms, we've got wood rooms. The stone rooms have wood accents, the wood rooms have stone accents. It all balances each other out. There's a lot of contrast and a lot of variety to here. In fact, there are 9 different walls, including the fences that I have for the windows, in all of this building, to add a whole lot of variety. In fact, we could add a 10th wall with some brown paint and some ebonwood wall, which looks a lot like the wood wall in a different orientation. Instead of going horizontally, it goes vertically. And I throw this around here, all of a sudden this building becomes patchy, kind of like a patchwork building. And it adds even more variety, more texture to the build. Of course, if you're going to do that with crimson stone or crimstone, you would have to be either in a hard mode world, or you would have to bring in ebonwood from off on a different world. But still, my point is, this isn't a progression thing. I'm not talking about how to do an early game house. I'm talking about what you can do to upgrade your wooden houses. Because remember, these were wooden houses. So the only thing that's standing out to me as not looking perfect here are the floors and the ceiling on this floor in particular. Now I could do another stone ceiling up here, but I think it would look better to have a wooden one, and I would like that to stand out separately from the floor that we have below. So I'm going to grab Dynasty wood here, and I'm just going to grab some brown paint and just fill this in. And all of a sudden, that changes the texture of the ceiling drastically, and in my opinion, improves it a lot as well. You might even do the same with the floor. You could leave it as wood if you like that. Spooky wood looks very similar, however it looks more old and rugged, which might be an even better fit for a build like this. You could even paint the wood with orange paint to make it look faded. There's so many things you could do, and once again, I keep repeating this because it's true. You have to go experiment with blocks, figure out what looks good together, figure out what doesn't, study other builders, see what they do, see what works for them, see what doesn't work for them, and expand on it from there. Great tools to use would be pallets. Those can help out a lot as well, but this is a massive trial and error project. To be able to turn your wooden box into something this fancy, I'm just showing you that it can be done, and all you need to do are follow the basic steps of increasing the wall size, increasing the room size, increasing the thickness, adding a foundation, adding a different orientation to the entire building. It just really magically instantly turns this into something far more interesting. Now, I'm not going to be covering furniture in the video today because I'm already running short on time. I am going to hop over to this build, which, remember, wooden boxes in the exact same orientation as this, but I'm going to make it look modern. So I'm going to be working on this modern design, which will obviously look nothing like this medieval one. However, I thought it might be interesting for you guys to see similarities in materials and how they can translate into other builds, so that you know that you have to experiment around and see what works and what doesn't work, because I have things for this build that I had in the other one, such as crimstone. I've got wood, I've got the large bamboo. It's going to be fairly interesting, but we're going to be starting off with the exterior and working our way inside just like last time, and using some team block with some black paint. And it doesn't really matter what color of team block you choose if you're to do a design like this. I'm just going to shave off the very top of that, and this will be our roof. Since this is a modern style house, I want it to be fairly flat, fairly boxy, unlike the medieval build, which in contrast is rather, I guess, bumpy. I guess that would be the best way to describe it. And on top of this, I'm going to make the roof just a tiny bit thicker with a little bit more of a different accent by using some white paint and some more green team block. And we're just going to hammer that platform 3 times for each one of these so that it lowers itself down to the roof level. And this is a very, very simplistic style roof if you wanted to make a modern style house yourself. And now, just like with the medieval style house, we're going to switch to gray paint and crimstone brick, and that will be all of the exterior walls for this build too, just to show you that you can use similar materials for different styles. Now, under these roofs, we're going to change the ceiling to wood using brown paint and large bamboo. And we're just going to fill in both of these ceiling segments as well as the floor below, although that's going to be a little bit different as well, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, at this bottom segment here where the overhang is, I'm actually going to be using some stone accent slab instead, and this is going to add a little bit more of a different texture, a different color, and it's not going to blend in with blocks, which will be very helpful in just a moment. But now that we have that in place, the support beams are going to be completely different as well. Instead of using beams or background walls, like with the medieval one, we created that room that you can't actually access. In this one, we're going to be using some actuators, some white paint, palladium column, and adamantite beam to make more of a modern looking support beam. So if I just bring this down right here, and then we make maybe 1 or 2 more of these. I think 2 more ought to look pretty good. I don't know if I'll have enough space for that, because this is going to end up blending in with those materials, and that's not really something I'm after. So actually, we'll just undo this and then move this one block to the side. And then with these adamantite beams, we're just going to go in between them like that, and even connect that all the way up to the house. That way we have a cross beam support plus these 2 pillars holding it up, and since they're all actuated, we could just push those into the background so that we can walk in front of them. Again, this is not a tutorial on how to build a beginner house, because there are definitely wooden boxes late game. I've seen them, you know they're there, so we're talking about how to improve your wooden box, not how to make an early game house. And again, using the stone accent slab, I'm going to do something a little bit different with the foundation than I did with the previous build. I'm going to actually work this underneath the floor. In other words, I'm going to be increasing the foundation because I'm going to be using a different material combination for this foundation, and it's going to look quite a bit different under here. And in my opinion, it doesn't look like the wood would be thick enough to hold up the building. I just like having this extra bit of detail here for this particular style of house. And then underneath, in the false foundation, we're going to use white paint and Titan stone wall because it, to me, looks very much like a concrete, which I think is perfectly fitting for a modern style house. Unlike the medieval one, I'm not going to be placing any fences in there to let in light. I don't think it's necessary for this kind of thing. We're just going to start moving on to the interior. And in order to do that, I'm going to get rid of all of these corner accent pieces. We don't need the visual support for this modern style, at least in my opinion. I think it detracts from what I'm trying to accomplish. And in my opinion, once again, I think it looks better to have everything a little bit more square and boxy for this particular style house. Now, on top of that, I'm going to be changing up the floor as well. But before I do that, I want to determine exactly how this room's going to work. I don't want a door here, and I don't want a door here. I will leave a door there, but I feel like these rooms would look better if they were more open for this modern style. So, in order to segment that off even more, I'm going to place a little bit of a stone accent slab on either side of it right here. So that way we could visually see a difference between the rooms while still not having a door. And now for the floor itself, I'm going to be grabbing some brown paint and boreal wood, which is not a material that I use often, but for something like this, it's very clean cut, very sleek, and I think is a absolutely perfect fit. So we'll just replace all of this wooden floor with boreal wood floor that's been painted brown. And now you'll see up here, it actually blends in with all of this large bamboo. And in my opinion, it's not an amazing look to have it blend. I like the accent line in between the stone accent slab and the boreal wood. So what I'm planning on doing instead is grabbing some more accent slab and just making that the ceiling of the first floor. Even though the ceiling of the second floor is still going to be large bamboo painted brown, this way we have a little bit more variety between the top and the bottom. We have the accent line, which in my opinion is a good thing. And if you're not happy with something, don't be afraid to change it up. You could always make alterations. It's your build, do what you want. So now it's time to work on the interior, and since this is a modern house, I think that it should have quite a bit of windows. So we're going to be grabbing glass, and it's going to be a big part of what these interiors are going to look like. In fact, I'm going to bring this up to here, and we might make one gigantic window right about here. I want to make it centered, so I'm going to actually cut off a little bit of the left right here. But this room is primarily going to be made out of wood. This next room, I want it to look like it has a gray or white plastered wall all the way up the tower, and it's even going to carry on over here. So these walls will be the same. This will be a wooden wall, this will be a grayish plaster wall, and this room will be a lime green wall. And now all of these are going to follow the same techniques as this. They're going to have blocks that accent, they're going to have blocks that add contrast. So the same thing is going to be happening here. Most of these walls are going to be normal wood walls, while in this next room, most of these walls are going to be white painted snow wall, which sounds weird, but that's what we're going with. Just trust me on this, it's going to look pretty good. That will also carry in over here and carry in over here as well. While as this bedroom area over here, which I assume would be a bedroom, again, we're not going to be doing furniture, but it could be whatever you want, will be blue dynasty wall primarily that's been painted lime. So we have all of our walls in place, all of our primary walls in place, none of the accent stuff yet. Now before I get to accent walls, I want to talk about another accent material that you can use within your build. So you might argue that this is a part of furniture, and you would technically be right. But we're going to look at beams and columns, namely in this case boreal, but you'll see if we go to column here, we've got various different kinds: marble, granite, sandstone. The same goes with beams as well. We've got rich mahogany, mushroom, and the normal wooden beams, as well as the boreal wood. I'm going to be using the boreal wood here, and I'm going to be flanking parts of the room where I want to have a diversity within the walls, and I'll be explaining that in a bit. So I'm actually going to put these right up against the window in this room, and this will add a big splash of color in this very gray room. I'm going to do the same right here and all of the way up here as well, and flank it on this side here too, to just kind of balance it out. With modern day builds, I think that there needs to be asymmetry with symmetry. It's kind of a weird concept, but that's the way that I think about it. So I'm going to do the same row right here, one more on this side, one right here, and then on either side of this window as well. And I'll explain why I'm going to be leaving a gap between this window where I didn't upstairs right there. I don't want to put any of these in the bedroom for a different reason. It would be more of a furniture reason than anything, because if I were to start placing these down everywhere, obviously we won't be able to place any furniture anywhere else in the house. So that's kind of the whole reasoning behind that. And then one more I'm going to place right there, just to bring symmetry into each of these rooms. Now we could start thinking about the accent walls for these rooms as well. I'm going to start off with this living room area that's primarily wood. I'm actually going to bring more contrast in here with some stone. So using some crimstone block, I'm just going to line the bottom of this floor right over here. Now I'm not going to do under the glass because I want it to feel like this is almost a sliding glass door. In fact, if I wanted to make it feel a little bit more in line with that, I might lower the glass one right there. Now I want a varying texture too. I don't want my contrast just to be made out of the stone, because it looks good, but it looks like this room's missing something. So if you grab some brown paint, and then I grab some palm wood, which is another material that I don't work with often, but if you use it in the right way as an accent, it looks absolutely phenomenal. And in my opinion, even more so in modern day builds. This isn't the only place that I plan to accent with this wall either. Anywhere we have a gap like this in between the two beams, so up here for example, I'm going to be putting that in between this room. Another place that I'm going to be putting that. It's just, it instantly pops against all of the other wood. It's a little bit lighter. It's going vertically instead of horizontally. It just immediately stands out. Now, to make this sliding glass door look more like a sliding glass door, what we could actually do is hammer out segments of it right there and right here, or you could even do it in another position. I just like it like this, and maybe it's not a sliding glass door, but in these modern day builds, I imagine that it looks pretty good to have a gap in between the panes like this. I didn't actually want to do the gap on the side there, that was just a misclick, but having a line run down the center of the windows doesn't look bad. Now, if you want these to be valid NPC houses, you have to be careful about how you do it. So obviously we'd need to section off these areas, which we could easily do with some platforms. This would section off the top floor from the bottom floor. Now, the reason we want it sectioned off is we can have holes in the background wall like these, but you can't have more than 4 connecting, and you can't have more than 16 in total. So right here we have 4 and we have 4. This room would be valid if we had enough furniture in it. It would actually include both of these rooms. All of these, or these 2 rooms right here, would be connected, and this one would be individual. We could not make a line down this room in this glass window and have a valid NPC house. This is too long. It's too many gaps connected in one segment, and it would completely break that unless you got a little cheaty and you grabbed maybe an echo block. Maybe I'm getting too advanced here. Maybe I should keep this simple. Okay, well, echo blocks could prevent that. But let's keep this simple. Let's fill this in with glass. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll save that for another video. But we'll leave these holes in here for now. And we're going to work on detailing these other rooms using some more of that palm wood because it's going to be a fantastic detail. Since these rooms are primarily gray, we're going to accent the bottom and the top of these rooms using the palm wood. And we'll do that for both of these gray rooms, including right over the window. Now, if you don't like the gap that causes this little glass overhang, you can hide that away by using some platforms, and you could just place those in there. It really does hide it pretty well. You can't really tell that that gap is there. You can't really tell the overhang is there. And you could also put furniture on the bottom segment to hide that too. Just another, I guess, overly advanced detail that I shouldn't be talking about right now. But that completes these two rooms. I need to do one more section right here with some more palm wood painted brown, and on the bottom as well. And out here towards the side, I'm going to do the same thing that I did on the medieval house with the rich mahogany fence, and just do that. I'm not going to do the shadewood fence because it feels a little more medieval to me, and it's not a huge a plus in my mind. I'm not a huge fan of the shadewood in a modern build. So the only room that's left to accent is this bedroom area over here. I'm going to do something a little bit different using some boreal wood and some gray paint because there's a lot of color in here. I think it'd be nice to contrast that with some gray. It would help if I actually put that in the right spot. There we go. Some gray paint because the green and the gray go well together. And then along the top of the room, I want a very thin white trim. So using the same technique that I used with the roof over here, I could place some white painted platforms along the roof, and now we end up with a very thin white trim along the top of the house. You might change up some of these doors if you wanted to, but again, that's more of a furniture thing. I would definitely put glass on those two doors. I think it would look much better. But here we go. Wooden boxes stacked up, made a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, added false foundations, and then I made one medieval, one modern. And I hope you found this build tip video useful. If you would like to see furniture tips continuing these two house styles, let me know in the comments. But thank you all very much for watching. And don't forget that I'm going to be having a live stream on Friday that's going to be detailing more build tips. So if you have any questions in your mind that you want answered relating to build tips in Terraria, be sure to show up to my live stream this Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific. That's 1 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. GMT. Until then, thank you all very much for watching. I'll catch you all later. Happy building.